that what's happening is that the soybean production is displacing the cattle producers because land that was already cleared for cattle production is being turned into soybean fields. And in turn, the cattle producers are going further into the Amazon and cutting down more trees to create new pasture after having left what's now soybean lands. Do you have a question? Yes. Well, yes, I mean, a lot of the soybeans and the corn alike are fed to animals rather than to humans. And a lot of the soybean production in Brazil is going to China, where I'm not sure whether it's ending up in cattle or not, but I think both. This is a map that depicts some of those. You can see that as much actually the Brazilian soybeans are just joining up with the American soybeans to satisfy the Chinese market. Soy expansion and deforestation, I guess we'll keep going. So, what is to be done? One proposal, we've met this one before, internalize externalities, accurately price water, energy, the atmosphere, etc., make pollution and emissions more accountable, dismantle subsidies to unsustainable producers. In a global economy with no global society, it may well be up to consumers to set a sustainable course. This is the comment made by Naylor and company in their article, just pointing out that the market is global, but there's no corresponding global political forum in which to address these questions, and to that extent, it may just come down to consumers. Therefore, we should strengthen democratic accountability and oversight, but obviously this raises the very question that they sort of allude to but don't answer. What is the proper scale for trying to do this? And then we get to another reading for today by Sir Partha Dasgupta, Nature and the Economy. If you make it through this, you will simply learn that he is an extremely prominent and successful economist who carries a great deal of weight in the world of ecological economics. The article that I asked you to read, called Nature and the Economy, attempts to incorporate measurements of natural capital into the overall assessment of economic growth. He says people in poor countries work mainly in economies that draw their production inputs directly from nature. They are biomass-based economies. Ecology is of direct concern to the world's poor in a way that is not to the world's rich. He defines total factor productivity, which according to the economists is the institutional context affecting overall productivity. He makes some interesting remarks about the role of institutional settings or institutional conditions in encouraging or discouraging economic production. Social productivity is the capitalized value of the flow of services an extra unit of an asset would provide society. This is not always priced. And he discusses the concept of shadow prices that would capture these background non-market aspects of production and the utility and value of things. So inclusive investment, which becomes an important term in his analysis, is equal to the sum of manufactured human and natural capital, and therefore should include both priced and non-priced components. He then goes on to offer an analysis, you can read this on your own, of the productivity per capita over a period of time, 1970 to 2000, in different parts of the world, compared to the U.S. and the United Kingdom as sort of benchmarks for the industrialized world. And he concludes that if you incorporate total factor productivity, TFP here, and population growth, that you end up concluding that the actual growth of many of the world's economies over the last 30 years is negligible or negative, and that this is due, on one part, to population growth. And the countries with very rapid population growth face declining conditions and prosperity on a per capita basis if their economic growth cannot keep up. And also that the loss of natural capital significantly diminishes or offsets the gains that might be made in economic or industrial capital. And that GDP per head here is a very poor measurement of these things. The final column, HDI, Change in Human Development Index, he suggests this measurement as well is inadequate insofar as it suggests that growth has been positive even in the face of what he suggests is unsustainability. All right, now we get to Garrett Hardin, unless you have questions about Dasgupta and the others. I suppose it's no surprise that I don't have much patience for Garrett Hardin's argument. But let's pick up some things beyond the pages of just that one extraordinarily famous article he published in 1968. So this is from 1991. He wrote something called Nobody Ever Dies of Overpopulation. I was in Calcutta when the cyclone struck East Bengal in November 1970. Early dispatches spoke of 15,000 dead, but the estimates rapidly escalated to 2 million and then dropped back to 500,000. A nice round number. It will do as well as any, for we will never know. The nameless ones who died, unimportant people far beyond the fringes of the social power structure, left no trace of their existence. Pakistani parents repaired the population loss in just 40 days, and the world turned its attention to other matters. What killed those unfortunate people? The Cyclone newspaper said. But one can just as logically say that overpopulation killed them. So his Nobody Ever Dies of Overpopulation title is intended sarcastically. He actually wishes to suggest that overpopulation does kill people. Anybody know anybody who died of overpopulation? So here's his famous argument. There he is. I believe he's still alive, isn't he? I think he is still alive. Very old man. He's somewhere here in California. I can't remember Santa Barbara. Picture a pasture open to all. As a rational being, each herdsman seeks to maximize his gain. The rational herdsman concludes that the only sensible course for him to pursue is to add another animal to his herd, and another, and another. But this is the conclusion reached by each and every rational herdsman sharing a commons. Therein is the tragedy. Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit in a world that is limited. Freedom in a commons brings ruin to all. Now, I take personal offense at this because I study pastures and livestock and ranchers, and I find his example to be wrong on that scale. But that's perhaps a rather minor part of this argument. If you have read this, you get to the end, and the conclusion he reaches is the one that we see in the pages of Connolly being foisted, implemented across across India in the 1970s, right? I mean, he basically says that we should not treat reproduction, that is human reproduction, the choice to have children, as a commons. And that allowing everyone to make their own decisions about reproducing will result in this tragedy. And his conclusion is that we must therefore strip people of that right. We should agree as a world community that reproduction is not a right and has to be restricted. And to that extent, the connection to the events in China depicted in Connolly's book is direct. On the other hand, again, it should be Hardin, for all the fame he's gotten for this article, shouldn't be held solely responsible for this. In many ways, he was a mouthpiece more than an instigator of this. But let's go on. The theory on which the commons problem is based rests on the concept of carrying capacity, which so far we have assumed is static. This is a justifiable assumption when we were speaking of a deer pasture in the wild, a habitat we propose to leave wild for aesthetic reasons. But when we talk about cattle pastures, fish culture in freshwater ponds, and oyster culture in estuaries, we are talking about areas in which it is possible to increase the carrying capacity by technological intervention. Much of what we have called progress in the last 2 centuries has resulted from increasing the carrying capacity of the earth by technological means. the carrying capacity, and this is from another article still, Ethical Implications of Carrying Capacity in 1977, the carrying capacity of a particular area is defined as the maximum number of a species that can be supported indefinitely by a particular habitat, allowing for seasonal and random changes without degradation of the environment and without diminishing carrying capacity in the future. Using deer as an example, again, the true carrying capacity of a region must allow for the fact that food is harder to get in winter than in summer and scarcer in drought years than in normal years. If too many head of deer are allowed in the pasture, they may overgraze it to such an extent that the ground is laid bare, producing soil erosion followed by less plant growth in subsequent years. Always by eating the grasses that appeal to them, herbivores selectively favor the weed grasses that are not appealing, thus tending to diminish the carrying capacity for themselves and for their progeny in subsequent years. This metaphor of pastures is just extraordinarily powerful, it seems. The first thing I want to say is that deer don't eat grass. For Christ's sake, he's an ecologist. He should know this. Deer are browsers. They're not grazers. In any case, leaving that aside. What are the ethical implications of this? He says, taking for granted the legitimacy of human desire to maximize gains from the deer pasture is thou shalt not kill a good ethical rule. It depends. If the herd size is less than the carrying capacity, we might insist on this rule. But if the herd has grown beyond carrying capacity, we should deliberately kill animals until the size of the herd is brought to a safe level. And we saw this at one point earlier, right, in connection with hunting. Carrying capacity used to explain why hunting wildlife is okay. But here we have it turned around in a rather interesting other way, in which it's no longer just about deer. It's actually using deer as some kind of weird analog for talking about people. Whenever men maintain a population of animals free of predators, they should, if they are humane, pursue a regular program of killing animals so as to keep the herd size below the carrying capacity of the habitat. We see that the ethics of game management is not an absolutist ethics, but a relativistic or situational ethics. The foundation of situational ethics is this. The morality of an act is determined by the state of the system at the time the act is performed. Ecology, a system-based view of the world, demands situational ethics. And this becomes his ethical argument for, effectively, what we see in Connolly happening in India. That sterilizing people, even under coercive circumstances, is ethical because the world is overpopulated. That's the basis of the argument. Perhaps the simplest summary of this analysis of man's population problems is this. The commons, if justifiable at all, is justifiable only under conditions of low population density. We must now recognize the necessity of abandoning the commons in breeding. Now, I could go on, and maybe I don't need to. This is a very interesting, twisted little piece of this in another article of his, not The Tragedy of the Commons, I believe. There's another one in which he cites favorably this article from Science. Yes, it must be later because it's 1974. He actually quotes virtually the entire article in the middle of his own article. Nicholas Wade's Sahelian Drought, No Victory for Western Aid. And in there, it's a discussion about the famine in the Sahel in the early 1970s. And Hardin quotes this article favorably. It says, this guy's provided us a really lucid analysis of the situation in the Sahel and what's going on. But if you look at what the guy actually says, one of the basic factors in the situation is overpopulation, both human and bovine, brought about by the application of modern science, says a former FAO sociologist. The story gets laid out, according to this, Western medicine, which, again, this is consistent with Connolly's analysis, led to rapid population growth, or rather extended life expectancies, which led to an expansion of farmland and reduced fallow periods, which produced erosion and reduced pasture for livestock, which resulted in overgrazing and further erosion, susceptibility to drought conditions, and famine. 100,000 dead, 7 million displaced or dependent. This is all summarized neatly in Wade's piece. Perhaps the most graphic proof of man's part in the desertification of the Sahel has come from a curiously shaped green pentagon discovered in a NASA satellite photograph by Norman McLeod. McLeod found that on a visit to the site of the pentagon, that the difference between it and the surrounding desert was nothing more than a barbed wire fence. Within was a 250,000-acre ranch, divided into 5 sectors with the cattle allowed to graze 1 sector a year. Although the ranch was started only 5 years ago, at the same time as the drought began, the simple protection afforded the land was enough to make the difference between pasture and desert. Now, the reason Hardin likes this is because it seems to suggest that the barbed wire fence was the solution. In other words, the privatization of that land, the making exclusive of access to that land, building fences as a way of ending the commons as the land tenure arrangement on this 250,000-acre ranch. Of course, Hardin doesn't really know anything about the indigenous practices of livestock grazing, and he also doesn't apparently know much about grazing management in general. The explanation would not so much be the fences, but the pattern of grazing and rest imposed on this land, which would happen, well, yes, the fences are necessary to that, but the fences, it's not the creation of private property that enables that necessarily. In fact, that's precisely what a lot of indigenous grazing practices have long achieved, is an alternation of grazing and rest. Oh, God, I'm sorry, I just get carried away and angry with this guy. So here's Hardin. Or no, I'm sorry, this is Wade still. The physical destruction of the Sahel was not an overnight process. Its beginnings can be traced to the French colonization of the late 19th century, when the Sahelian peoples lost with their political power the control over their range and wells, which was vital to the proper management of their resources. In other words, the very article that Hardin is so pleased with and is citing at such length, itself suggests that this was not about overpopulation. This was about the changing of productive systems and political power with the advent of French colonialism. The key to the Sahelian way of life was a remarkably efficient adaptation to the semi-desert environment. The traditional migration routes followed by the herds and the amount of time a herd given size might spend at a particular well were governed by rules worked out by tribal chiefs. In this way, overpasturage was avoided. Population increase led to more and more people trying to farm the land. An even sharper pressure was the introduction by the French of cash crops that earned foreign exchange. With the best lands given up to the cultivation of cotton and peanuts, people had to bring the more marginal lands into use to grow their own food crops. In many cases, these ecologically fragile zones could not take the strain of intensive agriculture. The usual process is that the fallow periods of 15 to 20 years are reduced to 5 or even 1. Fertility declines slowly at first and then in a vicious spiral. So, Hardin concludes, a curious feature of this excellent report is that nowhere does it specifically point out that the tragedy in the Sahel is precisely the tragedy of the commons, though the detailed account could hardly be improved upon as an illustrative example. The guy is just amazing. So, the conclusions I would offer is that in the absence of free markets, commons may in fact be sustainably managed by traditional or local institutions and knowledge. Free markets make commons into tragedies precisely by making private property appear to be the only rational solution. And how many more slides have I got? Oh God, you can get me going on my rant about 20th century range management. I guess I'll wrap this up in a moment. For example, early 20th century range management and administration in the United States. We went through a period of massive overgrazing in the late 19th century throughout most of the West. And this was diagnosed as a problem, exactly the way Hardin diagnoses overpopulation, a problem of open access and lack of regulation on the use of the range. Fencing was seen as the solution, imposing carrying capacities on pastures. This led to static stocking rates. The imposition of a number. You can have this many animals on this allotment of public land or whatever. The problem with that was that actual rainfall is not static. The average is actually rather meaningless, and what was needed was great flexibility in adjusting the numbers of animals to the amount of rainfall. And as a result, during droughts, there were in fact too many cattle on there, even if they were within the official carrying capacity. The science was flawed, and the market was the underlying force driving rationality rather than any kind of appreciation of ecological dynamics. That's my last slide, but I would offer one last thought in connection with the movie and wrapping this all up. And that is this, one suggestion not made in the movie as a solution to these problems, which I would like to put out there and ask for your thoughts about. How about we abolish the USDA? What? Sounds like the Tea Party. Yeah, maybe we get the Tea Party to support this idea. No, if you look back, I mean, the example that's always used is Upton Sinclair, right, and the jungle, and the public backlash that was mobilized around that book around 1906. If you read the histories and you look at what happened subsequently, the reforms that were implemented through the USDA, where, while they did reduce contamination or adulteration of the food supply, were in fact extremely favorable to large producers. And those large producers, in fact, benefited from the rules precisely to the extent that they required or imposed standards that were difficult to meet if you were a small-scale producer, if you were a Joel Salatin. It's the same exact thing. And there's good historical evidence to suggest that that's, in fact, what got the support of the large food producers for these reforms at all. They benefited on a scale level from the reforms, even if it looked like they also badly needed the cover. They needed the legitimacy provided by government inspectors to assure the population, that their consumers, that is, that the meat was safe. The rules about slaughter, which Joel Salatin complains about in the movie, are, in fact, still very much tilted in favor of large-scale production. And if you could find a way to impose environmental regulations on a sliding scale according to the scale of the producer being regulated, with more stringent standards for enormous producers and more flexible standards for small-scale producers, you might actually be able to achieve some of these things in interesting different ways. On the whole, the USDA, if you look at it historically, has been more a collaborator in industrial agriculture and large-scale production than an effective regulator. Yes? Do I want to dismantle the Bureau of Reclamation as well? I don't know. It depends on what the Tea Party demands. No, I'm not an expert in the Bureau of Reclamation, but they also have done a lot to encourage large-scale production in general. No, I mean, the NRCS is great. You know, it does actually focus on very local landscapes and peoples and provides a lot of useful information. The rest of the USDA, as far as I can tell, is as much a part of the problem as it is a part of the solution. But that's my personal opinion, and I'll shut up now. We'll see you next week. Thanks.